So right now we have our login.view file working well, and we've added the tag at my event equals submit handler up here. And of course, that's the shorthand for v_on. And what that means is that anytime this component hears an event named submit handler, when it receives one of those, it's going to call this handler down here, submit handler, in the methods component or the methods part of our JavaScript. And all that does is write to the console. So when we get that message printed to our console, we know that things are working and we're ready to connect to our back end and do something with the form data. And we also have this mounted lifecycle hook. And of course, this is the default JavaScript we get from Bootstrap for client-side validation. Now, this component uses FormTag. As you can see up here, FormTag, and here we've imported it down here, FormTag. And if we look at FormTag, it also has a lifecycle function called mounted that uses that same Bootstrap JavaScript. So we're going to change this. We're going to have to do something with one or the other or both. So let's get started. Now you might notice that I made a little formatting change up here in line 2 of my template. All I've done is take all of the various properties and put them on their own line, so it's easier to read. Now we're going to have to make some changes to this form tag. And the first thing I'm going to do is right here, I'm going to add @submit. So when we hear the event submit.prevent, okay, we're going to go to submit instead, a method named submit. And that doesn't exist yet, so we're going to have to write that in a moment. I'm also going to add this one, and this is straight out of Vue, ref equals name. And all that allows us to do is to pass a property, a prop named name, to this component and have that saved as a reference. And that lets me get access to the actual form in this component when I need to down in my JavaScript. So it's nothing more than a reference that allows me to get access to this form when I need to. Okay? So we've added that. And the other thing I'm going to have to add is an event. So the shorthand for vbind. And event is going to be equal to event, okay? And that means I need to come down here to my properties and I need to add both name and event because I'm using them up here and it won't work unless I actually register the properties down here. So we have that. Now let's add our methods and we have to have one for sure. I'll need to put my comma in. And the one we want is the one I'm referring to there back on line 3. Submit. So I'll create a function called submit, and it's just a function. And what is this going to do? Well, the very first thing I'm going to do is when this form is submitted, I actually need to get a reference to the form. And that's why I have that ref tag up there, okay? So I'm going to create a variable, and I'll call it my form. Let my form equal, and it's going to be this dot, and here's the syntax that's specific to Vue, $refs, references, and I'm looking for, in square brackets, this props, another $ syntax specific to Vue, name. Okay? That lets me get a reference to my form. Now I have an error right now because I haven't done anything with that, but here's where I'm going to actually use a subset of the logic that appears down here in the mounted lifecycle. Okay? So I'm going to say if my form dot, and I'm going to call the function that exists right down here. If you can find it, check validity, okay? So if my form dot check validity, if that's true, I think I have too many brackets here. Yeah, I do. That's better. And now I put one here. If my form check validity resolves to true, then I'll just print some stuff to the console right now. Console.log, and I'll say my event name. What event are we listening to? And we'll say this dot $props dot, or in square brackets. You can use either syntax actually. Event. So we'll print out the name of the event that we're getting. And we'll also say console.log name, just to see what name is set to. And this time I'll use the other syntax. This dot $props dot name. They both work. Okay, you can use the square brackets or you can use the dot notation. And at this point, I want to do something with that event. In other words, I need to generate the event, which is named whatever the value the property event is set to. It generates that and then it sends it out. It emits it. And that will allow this over here to capture that event. And the one I want is my event. Okay? So let's go back to the form tag and let's emit that event. And it's really simple. This dot $emit. I'm going to emit something. And I want to emit this dot $props with 1p. I'll use the square brackets this time. Event. So that will actually send it out. Now, you will notice that you get a warning here in your IDE that says, I don't really know what check validity is. And that's okay. I know that it's available to me because I'm using Bootstrap. And probably if I imported Bootstrap using npm import, that would go away, but I find I can live with that. It's not going to bother me at all. Now, the other thing I want to do is the same thing that happens down here on line 46 in my code. In the standard JavaScript we get from Bootstrap's website, we actually say form.classlist.add was validated. Well, we can't use quite that syntax up here, but we do need to do the same thing. Instead of form, I call it myForm, which is what I named it right there on line 21. myForm.classlist, capital L, .add was validated. Okay? So, the fact that I'm doing my client-side validation right here, and that's exactly what I'm doing, is standard Bootstrap client-side validation. Because I'm doing it here, I no longer need this at all. I can delete it entirely. So let me delete that. Don't need the mounted lifecycle event at all. And now, this is pretty short. And that also means that I can go back to login.view and scroll down to its section and delete its mounted lifecycle hook as well. Because my client-side validation really only needs to exist in one place. Okay? And the only other change I need to make to this, I think, to the login.view is to come and add those two properties we defined just a moment ago over in FormTag.view. So here in the form-tag tag, I'm going to add name. I'm going to call it myForm. And I'm going to add an event, which is equal to myEvent. And of course, that's what I'm listening for over here. So I pass the event that I'm going to send using this property, and I listen for that event over here where I have my event. Okay? So let's give this a try and see if we get everything right. So I'll go back to my web browser, and I'll go to the home page just to make sure it's working. It is. And I'll open the JavaScript console, and I'll make this a little bit wider so we can actually make it all fit on the screen. And I'll go to login. And first of all, I'll try just submitting this form and see what happens. And I get the proper feedback and nothing in the console, so that's good. Now I'll put in an email address in here, me@here.com, so that's valid. And some password. I'll put in password. And let's click login and see what happens. Everything worked, and I got the submit handler called success message. So, key takeaways here. Things that are brand new. Over in FormTag.view, down here, this is just standard Bootstrap validation, just simplified. But the key thing is that we're emitting an event here instead of submitting the form. So that stops the form submission, as you would have with a standard HTML form, and instead emits an event named, in our case, myEvent, which was received over here. It was sent over here. Event equals myEvent, and I can put whatever I want there, but whatever's here has to match this over here, myEvent. So at this point, we actually are at the point where we can now call a backend, which we're going to write in Go, and we're going to get started in that momentarily, and do some login, do some actual login logic. Okay? So we need to step away from Vue for a little while and start working in Go. And we'll do that in the next lecture.